When you think of the Dragon Warrior series, what do you think of? Me personally, I think of grinding, slimes, and a few dragons here and there. Maybe you think of something different, but hey, those are my personal thoughts. Dragon Warrior is far from the first RPG I've ever played, but I first played it close to about 10 years ago. I enjoyed it, but there's a few quirks to the original game that may turn off on players. Granted, I'll get to those eventually, but I don't want to rush things. First, being that this is indeed an RPG, I should start with the story, right? Well, you play as a descendant of the legendary warrior Erdrick, who slayed some evil demons a long time back. He obtained some relics known as the Balls of Light. No comments, please. These balls are kept away, but only for a short time. An evil warlock known as the Dragonlord stole the balls, monsters were created, the world becomes a dangerous place, and I need to go hunt down the Dragonlord to steal back your balls of light. You start the game talking to King Lorik, the only character in the game able to save your quest. He asks you to hunt down and find the missing princess, who incidentally is being held hostage and guarded by a dragon. With this, you now know your two missions: rescue the princess, and also the Balls of Light. Your journey is a long, hard trek through the world. You may start by fighting slimes and drakies, but near the end of the game it's nothing but warlocks and dragons. In order to be strong enough to fight those difficult baddies, you have to kill the smaller enemies. A lot. You see, Dragon Warrior being an RPG has a standard experience system. Every enemy killed nets you golden experience. When you accumulate a certain amount of XP, you gain a level. When you gain a level, you get a bit stronger. As I said, it's pretty standard. However, if you don't level up properly and try and move into unknown territory, you might die at the first battle. Leveling up, even once, can easily mean the difference between life and death in Dragon Warrior. Not to mention that it helps to have the best available equipment as well. But saying this, leveling up isn't always the easiest thing in the world to do. In fact, when you get to around level 10 or so, you'll start to find that leveling easily can take upwards of a few hours. I don't know about you, but I find fighting the same group of 3 enemies over and over for an hour to be pretty redundant and boring. This wouldn't be so bad if the game wasn't strictly one-on-one combat. That's right, unlike most other RPGs of the time, the starting character is also the only one you ever play as. There's no such thing as a party in Dragon Warrior. But fortunately, Enix also decided that you will never have to face 2 monsters at the same time. That's probably good, because no matter what level you are, the area you're battling in can probably kick your ass. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that the game can be overly difficult. The best practice I've found is to kill enough enemies to gain enough gold to buy the best equipment available in the nearest town. Once you can comfortably kill the enemies, you cross the bridge to the next area and repeat. Speaking of, the bridges are basically the dividing line between areas, so crossing them usually results in the different monster groups. It's actually a pretty cool system, because using the bridges, you can tell when you're straying too far from a safe zone. Finally, there's no quick travel between towns, so no warp spells or anything like that. The only traveling spell and item you get warps you to the starting point of the game. Now, this can be great when you're in an emergency, but at the same time, when you're forced to slowly walk back to where you're at, it really sucks. So you might want to be careful when you are using this spell. So what about the battles? They're very simplistic in nature, and since there's only ever one enemy and one hero at any time, it's very easy to learn. Most of the time you'll just be using the simple fight command. On occasion though, you may decide to use one of the spells that are available. These spells are learned automatically at specific levels. Unfortunately, many of them have limited use. There's about 3 spells you use in combat. They're Heal, Heal More, and Sleep. Heal and Heal More are pretty obvious, but the Sleep spell can win or lose battles. Stronger enemies can often defeat you in just a few hits, so putting them to sleep can save your ass. However, there is a risk. Sleep doesn't always work, and when it fails, you're just wasting turns. It's up to you on whether or not to use it. At the same time, you can also use Stop spell against magic-oriented creatures. The same notes apply to this one as well, as it doesn't always work, but it's often worth a chance. Especially if the enemy is something able to cast Sleep against you. One of the more unusual things about the battle system is that, although you get access to critical hits, they will sometimes miss. I don't think I've ever played another game where the critical hits, which usually assume that the attacker has struck a perfectly accurate and devastating blow, would fail. It's something that can be frustrating because you'll see the critical hit message, and then misses shortly after that. There's not a ton of monster variation. There's maybe about 15 different sprites, and then the rest are just reskinned versions that are more powerful. There's some pretty decent detail put into these creatures, but it's nothing that's really going to blow your mind. That's pretty much the entire story on the graphics. Also, the only animation you'll ever see is the character walking around. There's no spell or attacking effects in battle. So overall, the graphics can be considered okay, but dull. Speaking of the combat, there's only really 2 bosses. One of them is the green dragon you find when attempting to save the princess. Although you'll find the same enemy in later areas, you're going to be in a tough battle for this one just because you probably won't be as powerful as you were hoping, and its fire-breathing attack can easily shave off half your health. If you can get lucky, you can put it to sleep and put a huge dent in its own health. The second boss is the Dragonlord himself. He does have two forms, and it's actually fairly easy if you're careful enough not to let your HP drop too low. You might wonder when to try attacking the Dragonlord. Well, there's a few requirements. You should have all 3 pieces of Urjuk's equipment, found in various areas of the world. You should also be at a minimum of level 20, although I have completed the game at level 19. Just for shits and giggles, I actually maxed out at level 30 in this playthrough, and the final boss essentially became a joke. I don't think the game actually expects you to level up that high, but even so, the monsters in the final dungeon are still rough to fight. Now, you might be asking about Urjuk's gear, and that's another part of the problem with Dragon Warrior. There's a major lack of direction on where you should be going. Oftentimes you have to travel towns and talk to everyone just to get a clue on where to head to next. Normally I wouldn't complain about this part, as I like exploring in RPGs, but there's really no indication on how to get to certain items other than a very vague conversation. So where is Urjuk's gear? Well, the token, which is just used to get another important item and is never actually equipped, is found in a massive swamp. Every swamp tile deals out damage to you unless you found the Urjuk's armor. This armor is found in a destroyed town behind a counter next to a tree. However, in order to obtain it, you'll need to defeat an Axe Knight, who can be a tough opponent since he likes putting you to sleep. If you're lucky enough, you can manage to obtain this fairly early in the game, and it's the best armor of the game, both because of its armor rating, and also because it heals you 1 HP for every step you take. Finally, Urjuk's sword is in the Dragonlord's castle itself, so you need to set foot in it and probably end up running away from the majority of the battles, because without the sword you might not be able to defeat many of the enemies. Once you do fight the Dragonlord and defeat him, you'll be warped out to the beginning castle. You'll be able to talk to the soldiers, but you want to go talk to the king, who offers you the crown. The hero responds with no, and then he wants to rule his own land that he discovers. Then the princess demands that she joins you. Then the game ends. It's a very short ending for a pretty long game. Finally, one other gripe that I must talk about: the menu system. Basically, in order to bring up the menu outside a battle, you press A. But then you see the excessive amount of commands available. Many of these commands are hardly ever used. Door opens up a door if you have a key. Stairs allows you to walk downstairs. Search is just for seeing if there's a hidden item around, and take grab stuff out of treasure chests. Are all of these really necessary? Why don't doors just open when you touch them? The same idea applies with stairwells. I really don't get it. Even talk could have been avoided with a simple press of A. What should have existed was a simple menu by pressing start that gave you an option of status, item, and magic. It would have been much simpler, but instead, if you want to do anything in the field or in a town, you have to bring up the menu and choose what you want. Also, if you want to heal yourself with magic after a battle, you'll need to bring up the menu every time you want to cast a spell, because it closes when choosing something. It's just really redundant. Dragon Warrior might not be the best RPG out there, and it can be utterly frustrating and dull at times, but it still has a certain charm to it. Maybe it's the fact that I can play the game and watch a video at the same time, but it's still fun to try figuring out the puzzle of where every item is. It's also cool to have to read all the Old English dialogue, because it's actually well done. If there were a few more save points or maybe even a town teleporting spell, I probably would have enjoyed it more. But being that it's the first game in the series, of course it's going to have a few hiccups. But definitely give it a shot, because it is enjoyable, at least for a little while. Final score? 7 out of 10. This is Reaper. Happy fragging.